So we've been going over this presentation called CIA versus God, How to Save the World. And as we have accepted our role as ambassador, God's ambassador, we realize that we have a very distinct role in that process. And I maintain that that is the process that we have to follow, that man's plan, the CIA plan, hasn't really improved anything in the world. Evil is still dominant. But we can save people one at a time. And that's God's plan. And I want to go over God's plan. Just a quick summary. I want to go over the Great Commandment in Matthew and the Great Commission in Matthew, because I want to talk about the great sin. Because I think there's one tactic that the devil uses, and we talked earlier in a presentation about the devil's tactics, but there's one tactic that is the most sinister of all. And that's what we're going to talk about today in this CIA versus God. We're going to talk about pride versus humility. CIA plan, God's plan, humility. James 4:6 says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Proverbs 18:12 says, before his downfall, a man's heart is proud, but humility comes before honor. Pride. Now, when we say pride, doesn't necessarily mean that all pride is bad. It's just like when we talk about the other tactics, pleasure, lust of the eyes. God has put inherent things in us at our birth that can be pleasurable and they're good for us. But we have to be able to recognize the difference. Well, we can recognize the difference on some of those tactics because it's easy. You go, oh, so-and-so murdered a person. He's a bad person. But you hear somebody go, well, so-and-so is a prideful person. And you go, huh, what does that mean exactly? At Ford Motor Company, we had these 360 evaluations where you had to send out emails to all these people, your supervisors, people above you, people below you, and everyone sends back an evaluation. And I sent all mine out one year, and one year I got back a one-liner that kind of stunned me. Everybody else wrote these, big half a page things about you. But I had one person who was very blunt, had been a former Green Beret in Vietnam, heavily decorated. And his first line of my 360 said, you are an arrogant and son of a gun, not necessarily in those words, but you always back it up, and I appreciate that. Period. That was it. I'm thinking, how can he even write this on an HR document? But at the time, you know what? I didn't really take it as a bad me being a bad person. I didn't even take it as a bad review. I took it as, yeah, I guess I am arrogant sometimes. Because I do think I'm right. And like he said, I back it up. And that's the definition of pride, is that I don't need anybody's help. I can do it. I'm smarter. I'm brighter. I can do this on my own. God doesn't have to help me. Everything I've got because I've worked hard at it. Discounting God's role in my life. That God's really in charge. Everything I have is His. And that I'm really not that important. What's important is the fact that we're here to fulfill our role as ambassador in God's plan to save the world. We have to work on saving the world. And so I want to talk about the great sin. But as I said before, let's read that the greatest commandment, says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. That's Matthew 22, 37 through 40. And I've discussed earlier, this is hard for me. Understand and love God, yes, I can understand. Love your neighbor. I said before, I don't like my neighbor sometime. Why do I have to get involved with all these other people? Why can't I just isolate myself a little bit? Isolation is a tool of the devil. So we have to be careful. God built us to have relationships. You remember I told you, Ecclesiastes talk about, hey, one can be easily defeated. Two has much greater defense, and three, wrapped together as a cord, have great strength. He wants us to help each other. He wants us to be there for each other. And then so if we go over to the Great Commission, then the 11 disciples went to Galilee to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. And when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. Remember that. And Jesus said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go. He's not making an option. He's telling you, go, make disciples. So we're trying to make people become more Christ-like. Of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. So now we've got the Great Commandment, the Great Commission, and now let's talk about the great sin. Remember when I just read you the Great Commission? It said, here they are, they're standing right in front of Jesus, the apostles, but some doubted. You remember, if we look at this, if we think of the whole Adam and Eve story, think about that for a minute. We've got Adam and Eve, and remember we talked about some tactics earlier. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and pride. So we really don't have, in that scenario with those two people, a lot of things that the devil can target them on. It's not like we have TV. It's not like we have social media. It's not like we have alcohol, drugs. It's just two people there. And remember we talked about target selection and target tactics and looking where your weaknesses are. And then the devil kind of looks around and he goes, ha-ha. He chose a target. He only had two. I don't know why he chose Eve first. People can debate that for the ages. When I ask people, and sometimes in classes, why do you think you targeted Eve first? A lot of people will go, oh, well, mostly men, oh, that's the weaker sex. And then the women will go, no, maybe because she was smarter and she was more intellectual. And I go, see, yeah, I agree with that. Maybe she was smarter. Maybe there were lots of reasons. We'll never know. But for some reason, Satan decided to use his tactic, his favorite tactic, which is pride. And he approached her and said, hey, you can eat that apple. I know God told you not to do it, but the only reason he told you that was because he doesn't want you to be like him and to know everything. And so now, intellectually, you start saying, oh, I can be like God. I can be strong. I can do it on my own. I really don't need him. I can be that way. I can do it on my own. That's the first little notion of pride that creeps in on you that leads to our downfall. Some people say Satan himself. Pride. He decided, I don't like God telling me what to do all the time. I'm as good as he is. I can do the things that he does. I'm as smart as he is. I don't need his help. And so then he falls to earth to run the heavenly realms here. So he starts out, pride was his downfall. And now he's got Eve, and so he's got pride there. Now you take Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and there's only 4 of them again, and I go back to what I said. There's no drugs, there's no alcohol, there's no Xbox for the kids, there's no social media, they're not using their cell phones. There's just 4 of them. There's no other really outside things. It's not like we had pornography. One of them gets targeted. Cain and Abel. Both of them offerings to God. For whatever reason, one is acceptable. One's not. Cain's is acceptable. Abel's is not. And the next thing you know, Abel is going, he's angry. He's angry with God. Maybe he's jealous. Maybe he thinks he doesn't need God, that he can't tell me what to do. What I did was just as good. And the next thing you know, we have the first murder. With none of these outside influences that we worry about now. The television didn't tell him to do it. I'm just saying that pride is a tricky one. And I'll share my personal experience with pride. Again, a guy calls me arrogant, I go, good, I am. I back it up. I had too much self-importance. If you ever notice you get a bunch of men together, women will always, this is a generality, but I believe it to be true. And you don't have to believe it, it's just what I believe. You get women together and you put like 20 of them together in a room, and they're going to know everything about their families, and they're going to talk about their feelings and what's going on, and oh, I'm so sorry to hear about, what happened to you or your family. You put a bunch of men in a room together, we're going to walk out. We may not even know if you have kids. I used to travel with men sometimes, and we'd be gone for, a month together. And I'd come back, my wife would say, well, what does his wife do? I go, I don't know what his wife does. What does his kids do? I don't know. I don't know what his kids do. What'd you guys talk about? And if you put a bunch of us together, we have a tendency, eventually we get to, well, what's your job? Because we're trying to evaluate where everybody is in the hierarchy. And then we're listening to everybody tell all these stories. How many times you heard people talk about, well, when I was in high school, we won the state championship. And you've heard it 20 times. And it's because that is pride in that event. They just want to keep telling you. Because they have pride in themselves. But they can't tell you where they've helped somebody. I remember a guy asked me one time, something about my dad. It came up in a conversation. I said, yeah, unfortunately, my father died at an early age of this rare lung disease. And he looked at me for a minute, and he goes, oh, okay. Hey, did you see that basketball game the other day? It's just the way we're built some. And then we have to work on it. But me, as a man, I had to work on it. So here, I'll give you a personal story for me that really was a time that convicted me of my pride and made me realize, dude, you have an issue. And when I retired from Ford Motor Company, I had told the story before that I decided to go back to the Liberty Baptist Theological Seminary, and I got a Master of Arts degree in Christian ministry and pastoral counseling, and I decided, and I'd always been active in the church, but I wanted to be more active in the church. I felt the need that I had tried to save the world through the CIA and I couldn't, but I see this opportunity to save the world through God's plan. That we can't defeat evil. God has already defeated evil. I can't defeat evil. God has defeated evil, but I am part of the plan as God's ambassador to follow the Great Commandment and the Great Commission. Two very simple rules in the Bible so that you don't get hung up on all the little details. Details are important. You should always be reading the entire Bible and study it, but really God has a simple plan. Pride holds us up. So I start teaching a Bible course called Authentic Men at Northridge Church, which is where I'm a member. And I'm thinking about things that I want to do. And one of the things that I wanted to do was be involved with children, if I could, to do something to help kids. And part of that is when you travel around the world, you see all these children that are in stress and danger. And you realize there's nothing they can do to get out of it. I was in Sudan one time. I was out in a house in the middle of the neighborhood. There was a civil war going on there. The Islamic government was fighting the Christians in the south. Famine, no food, literally no food in the entire country. Settlements of people that are homeless everywhere. Hundreds of thousands of people. When you check out to go visit a country, when you work for the government, they usually give you a security briefing. And so they tell you, hey, don't do this, don't do that. There was an American who had been assassinated there before, that worked at the embassy. Don't drink the water. You always heard that one, most places you go. Sudan was the first time I had a doctor look at me and said, hey, if you can, you probably shouldn't try to breathe the air. I remember looking at him going, what? Don't breathe the air. Because we had all these settlements of people who are displaced with no food. They're living out in the open. It's a very arid climate there. And we basically have all this fecal content now in the air because there's no restrooms or bathrooms anywhere, and we have all these thousands of people. Don't breathe the air. And I lived on top of a house. I had a 3-story house there, had a big fence around it. And we had you could go up on a roof and look around. It was a nice place just to see what was going on around you. But it just so happened over the years, that house was in a neighborhood that people just kept coming into that had no home right there in Khartoum. And there now was literally thousands of homeless people. And I could stand up on the roof of my house and look down and see all these people that were living in boxes and sticks, anything that would cover them from the sun, no walls, no toilets, thousands of people. And there was a family right beside me. I could look off to the side. There was a family of about 8. And I'm there for about 8 weeks, and I became fascinated with them. And they would cook dinner on a small fire. And there was one man occasionally, but most of the time it was 3 women, and probably anywhere from 5 to 6 kids, and all of them were young, and lots of them were starving because you could tell by their extended stomachs. And I just marveled at the fact that, one, they were surviving, but 2, how did we get to this point where people can be treated like this? And you see that all around the world. So it always wanted me to help children. You go to the Philippines and there'd be children begging everywhere. I never gave coins to beggars, but I always gave them to the kids. But as soon as you give a coin, then there'd be 10 more kids, and they'd come from everywhere. And I took my children to the Dominican Republic one time, and we're sitting there eating pizza, and they're probably 7 and 5. I'm on a business trip there for 8 weeks, and there's 2 kids standing outside the window of the little pizza, open air pizza, and they're just saying, give me food. And I remember my sons asking, because they're about their age, going, where are their parents? And I I go, they may not have parents. They don't have money. They don't have anything. And that was a hard concept for them to understand. And we made sure that we left some pizza. But we haven't been able to save the world. So I'm teaching this class. I have this need to do something with children. And it's called Authentic Men. And afterwards, I'm talking to one of the men there in the class. And he goes, yeah, I have to go down to my wife. They're having a presentation. I got to pick her up. They're having a presentation at the women's group about the foster care closet. And I go, what? He goes, it's the foster care closet. It's where people donate clothes for kids when they're in foster care and they're torn away from their families. And I go, God, thank you. I've been debating this, trying to figure some of this out. Thank you, God. Let's go down and let's just walk down with him while he goes and gets his wife and see if this lady's still there. And so I go down and there's a lady giving a presentation. We wait a few minutes. It's over. I walk in, say hello to everybody because I know some of the people there, and I get introduced to Rachel, and she's in charge of this foster care closet. That's very near me. And I ask her what she does, and she tells me. And Northridge Church has another great program that I'd seen before where we buy duffel bags and we donate things for the foster care kids, clothes, toys, toiletries, and you put everything in a bag because when they come and rip these people out of their homes, these little children, sometimes they just take them right out and they don't get a chance to take anything with them, or they take it in a garbage bag. And so Northridge literally would collect every year thousands and thousands of these duffel bags to go to the local community. And so when I talked to Rachel, this is on a Wednesday night, and she goes, yeah, people donate all these clothes. We have to sort them out. We never have enough volunteers. I go, when do you do that? She goes, tomorrow night, Thursday nights. And I go, I'll be there. So she gives me the address. So I go out and I drive up to her house and walk in there, and she's probably got like a basement with 1,700 square feet or so. And there is stuff everywhere, but she has it super organized. But there's these giant boxes of clothes that people have donated, and toys and books, toiletries and everything. And she goes, we just have to sort it. And it just so happened that she introduced me to a guy who walked in at the same time. And she said, yeah, here's part of our board. So here was one guy, and then here's another board member. And they were just talking in general about, hey, we have to give some presentations to raise some money, and we need to go talk to this club, and this club, and this club. They're talking to each other, and I'm listening. And then here's Chris, who thinks he can do everything, better. He goes, yeah, I'll go speak, for you there if you like. And I see everybody else as well. Okay, yeah, that's okay. We'd like for you to get involved. But the one guy who is the president there, who's in charge kind of the board, Rachel runs everything. She's the one who started it, but he's kind of like the president, I remember. He goes, well, maybe you just want to see what we do first. I've already got myself going out being the spokesperson. I've never even been there. So this is my first night. So I asked Rachel, what do you want me to do? She said, hey, it would be super nice if you would sort some of the boys' clothing. We sort it out. Sort the blue jeans by size, and then take them over there, and there's a big shelf where everything goes. Large size start at the top, small size goes to the bottom. So I'm going to spend 2 hours there. I start sorting jeans. I'm looking at sizes. I'm folding them up because you want them folded in a certain way. Takes me a while. My first hour is really kind of quiet. My second hour, now I've got all my jeans folded, so I'm going over there, and big giant shelf, and I start at the top because I'm tall. She goes, oh, you can reach up there, yeah. And so, a lot of the sizes are wrong, and so I'm sorting them again. But I really haven't seen any kids, and now all of a sudden these two families come in, and two different women with two different children, and so they're probably 5 years old. And so they're now running about because now they can choose whatever they want. They have toys, they have books, they have clothes. And I see them both, and they're so excited. Both of them, and they're excited. And as they're running about, they're picking up this, and they're picking up this, and they're going back. Can I have this? Can I sure? What do you think about this? And in the meantime, I've been, stacking things, and it just happened. I'm getting near the bottom, and so as I get down, so I'm down like this, and I'm on my knees, and I'm sorting through, and I'm pulling out pants, and I'm sticking them on this bottom shelf, putting these on there, and all of a sudden this little girl comes by, and she goes, "How do I look?" Because she had picked up like a little feather boa around her, and it was like yellowish green. And she had it wrapped around her, and she's just standing there smiling, this little 5-year-old. "How do I look?" And I said, "You look marvelous, darling." And I remember God saying, "You're not that important, are you, Chris? That's what's important right there, helping others. You are not that important. It's not about you." And sometimes I get emotional when I even think about that. But what I want you to know is God wants us to help people. God wants us to follow that commandment of love God with all your heart and your soul and your mind. That's an easy one. But God said He wants you to love your neighbor thyself. And that's a hard one. And then if you let the devil intercede here with this pride versus humility, that tactic, the great sin, that tactic always works because we have pride, not humility. And that God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Remember what we talked about, CIA versus God. Choose God's plan, become God's ambassador. Through prayer and Ephesians, build up your defenses so that you can overcome Satan and we can overcome this world. And let's go forth and be God's disciples to save the world.